And thank you so much. And thank everybody for joining me today to learn about clicker training your pets. I hope you're really excited to learn about this. I know many of you have heard of clicker training. Some of you don't really understand what it's all about. So that's what I wanted to introduce to you tonight. But I definitely want to start by thanking Assisi Animal Health for asking me to give this talk. And also, I want to thank them for their innovative work to help pets. In particular, the development of the Calmer Canine has been wonderful for people like me who work behavior cases. This product helps dogs that have separation anxiety and other anxieties as well, but mostly separation anxiety is what their research and development have been focusing on with the Calmer Canine. And in fact, recently they conducted a scientific study that looked at the effectiveness of the Calmer Canine to help dogs with separation anxiety. And as you can see by some of these graphs, just real quickly, it is really very, very beneficial, even without drug use, but even when compared to drug use, it actually helps just as much. So if you have a dog suffering from separation anxiety, this is one of the tools that behavior consultants like to introduce you to help your dog. Okay, so now I want to talk about our subject for this evening. And I want to start by talking about learning. So basically, how animals learn. Well, you probably know that animals are really learning all of the time. Whenever an animal exhibits a behavior, they learn whether or not that behavior is worth repeating. Okay, so what we say in my field is that animals do what works, but they do what works for them, not necessarily what works for you. Okay, so the question being, is this dog up on the table? Is this working for this dog? And the answer is, yeah, he gets to lay in the sun, watch the squirrels, maybe lick the butter dish and some crumbs from breakfast. It's working for him, even though it might not work for you when you come into the kitchen and see him up there. So remember that animals do what works. And animals learn basically two ways. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about those two ways. The first way they learn is called classical conditioning. And the second way they learn is called operant conditioning. And I'm going to explain those things because you don't really want to remember all those terms. But let's talk about what classical conditioning is. So you may have heard of the scientist named Pavlov. Classical conditioning is the same as Pavlovian conditioning. And if you remember back to Pavlov's study, what he did was he rang the bell. He had some lab dogs and he rang a bell and then gave them their food. And then he rang the bell and gave them their food and rang the bell and gave them their food. And after a while of pairing the sound of the bell with their food, all he had to do was ring the bell. And even with no food around, the dogs started drooling. So this was named Pavlovian conditioning after the scientists that discovered this form of learning. So it's really just about learning associations, right? Connecting things. And animals learn this way all of the time. And if you think about your pets at home, when you pick up that leash, what does your dog know? We're going for a walk. Because now the leash has been associated with going for a walk. When you open that can of tasty fancy feast, what does your cat know when they hear the crack of the can? They know they're going to get fed. So this is learning through Pavlovian conditioning or learning through association. Now, the second form of learning is called operant conditioning. And what operant conditioning is learning from the consequences of the behavior. So if the consequence of the behavior is reinforcing to the animal, then the behavior will most likely happen again. Because if they get some kind of reinforcement for it, they'll do it again. And if it's not reinforced, it should go away because animals really don't have any need to expend energy on things that they get nothing out of. So if your dog or cat or any other pet in your home is doing a behavior and they do it more than a couple of times, you know they're getting some kind of reinforcement for it. And we use the word reinforcement rather than reward, because when we say reward, you think of a cookie. But reinforcement can be lots of different things. And so know that the animal's getting something out of it if they're repeating the behavior. So animals are trial and error learners, right? So if the behavior works for them, they're going to do it again. But if the behavior doesn't work for them, then they're going to try something else. So for example, if a dog scratches at the door to be let outside and you go over and open the door, he's going to keep scratching at the door. But if he scratches at the door and you don't let him outside, he's not going to sit there for 5 hours scratching the door. He's going to try something else. He's going to say, woof. And if barking gets you to come open the door, then that worked. Scratching didn't. So that's what we mean by they're trial and error learners. The consequence of the behavior dictates whether the behavior will happen again. And the unfortunate thing is, fortunate and unfortunate, is this is true with the behaviors we like as well as the behaviors we don't like. Okay, so we always have to remember, if they're doing something we don't like, we probably are rewarding it or reinforcing it in some way, or at least something is reinforcing it. So now that leads me into our discussion of this talk, and that is clicker training. So you may or may not have heard of clicker training before. Many people have been introduced to clicker training on television shows and things like that. And so I wanted to introduce clicker training to you so that you can understand how it works, why it works, and how to do it so that you can start clicker training your pets at home. So clicker training is what we call a marker-based training technique. Okay. And so I want to go through talking about how it works, because these guys want to know how it works too. And I know you do as well. Okay, so what we do is we start with that first kind of learning, the Pavlovian conditioning. Okay, and again, that is forming an association. So with clicker training, the very first step is to do the Pavlovian conditioning. So you get 5 or 6 treats, you get your clicker, and it doesn't matter what animal you're working with, and you do that Pavlovian conditioning. So you click and you give a treat, and you click and you give a treat, and you click and you give a treat, and you do that 5 or 6 times. And then that animal says, I don't know what that weird noise is, but every time I hear it, I get a treat. And so that now they're tuning into that noise, and they know that it is a predictor of the treat. Okay, so that's the Pavlovian conditioning. And you only have to do that one time, and that animal is going to remember that that clicker is significant. Okay, and then we go to step 2. And step 2 in clicker training is we now use the sound of the clicker to mark the behavior that you like, the behavior that you're going to reward. Okay, and so for example, if your dog, you're working on sit and he plants his butt, you click the clicker right when he plants his butt, and then you deliver the treat. Okay, and so the animal then learns that the behavior that they did when they heard the click is the behavior that earned the reward. So it's kind of like speaking to the animal and saying that's the exact behavior that earns you the reward. Okay, and so it's a very effective way to train any animal because it is communication they understand. You have to remember that animals do not share our language. Okay, they don't understand English. They hear these words, they learn them eventually through association. But if you just walk up to a dog who's never been trained to sit before and say, sit, you might as well be saying tuna fish sandwich. To the dog, sit means nothing. And so what this does is it says that behavior earns your reward. And then you can give it a name once that animal knows the behavior is worth repeating. Okay, and so again, reinforced behaviors will be repeated. So when the animal learns that a behavior that they do earns something that they like, and that can be a treat, it can be play, it can be access to the yard, going for a ride in the car, whatever they like, when they learn that their behavior earns the thing they like, they're going to do it again. And the more a behavior is rewarded or reinforced, the stronger the behavior becomes. And so that's what training is all about. It's reinforcing the behaviors you like, and so that the animal will repeat those behaviors when asked. Okay, so that's how they learn. And so the question being, okay, well, I get that. That all makes sense so far, but why do we need a clicker? Why should we use a clicker? Well, there's a couple reasons why I like to use the clicker. First, it's a very clear signal. And once you've done that Pavlovian conditioning, the animal knows when they hear that click, that very clear, distinct signal, that means they're going to get a treat. So that means your training bargain is, if I click, I have to give the reward. So if you click by accident, give them the reward anyway. Okay, and just try not to click too many times by accident, but it's a clear signal. Also really important with a clicker is it carries no emotion like our voice does. So, when we talk to a dog, if we're getting annoyed with them or we're getting frustrated because they're not understanding what we want them to do, we could have that annoyance in our voice. Well, a clicker doesn't have any emotion in it. It always sounds the same. And it says that was worth doing. The other thing is that it's very quick to mark the behavior you like. And that is if you have good eye-thumb coordination. Okay. And so a little practice thing I have my students do is take a tennis ball, throw with the animal nowhere near, throw it up in the air and click every time it bounces on the floor, every time it hits the floor. And that'll help train your eye to click at the right time. And so, but it can quickly mark the behavior. Like, yes, that's it right there. The other reason I like the clicker as opposed to a marker word, which is totally fine to use. You can just use a marker word. But I like the clicker because it doesn't require any processing in the brain. And what I mean by that, I said that animals don't understand English. So every time we talk to them or say a word, they're trying to process it with the cognitive part of their brain. But with a clicker, we know that once you've done that Pavlovian conditioning, that association between the click and the treat goes deeper in the brain. We know that when we go all the way back to Pavlov's work, because what happened once they learned that association, he rang the bell and they drooled. Drooling is a physiological response. It's not something they can do cognitively. It's not something they can make themselves do. So those are all the reasons I like to use the clicker. So I want to tell you a little bit of the history of clicker training and where it started. It actually started with the marine mammals back in the 60s, because when they first brought the marine mammals into captivity, they couldn't figure out how to train them because they're way in the pool. And so if the dolphin does a really cool flip in the middle of the pool, and then the trainer says, oh, I like that, I'm going to reinforce it. And when the dolphin swims over, he gives them a fish. The dolphin is getting the fish for swimming over. Because if you don't reward a behavior while it's happening or within a half a second, the animal doesn't make that connection. Okay, so what they started doing with the whistle, which is the marker signal we use with marine mammals because the sound travels better underwater, is the whistle tells the animal exactly which behavior earns the reward. So the dolphin goes out, does a flip, the trainer blows the whistle right when they're doing their flip, and then they know, the dolphin knows that's the behavior that earns the reward, comes over, gets the reward, goes out, does another flip. So if you've ever been to any kind of marine mammal show, you've seen the trainers wear a whistle in their mouth, and that's the marker signal for dolphins and all other marine mammals that they work with. And then clicker training moved to the rest of the zoo field. And typically it's used mostly for husbandry training. So to help move the animals from one place to the other, for them to present body parts and things like that. So on the left here, we see a lion touching a target. And on the right, we see a gorilla who's learned to open his mouth so they can look in his mouth, just like we do at the doctor. It's all done with clicker training.
In target training, keepers hoist a foam target into the air. When giraffes touch the target with their nose, they get a treat. Because of their long necks, the time between touching the target and getting the treat is often longer than their memory. So the keepers fill the void with the sound of a reinforcing hand clicker. While it may look like fun, the activity is of critical importance. Target training is the least stressful and most effective way to keep a giraffe still during veterinary procedures.
So that's the kind of thing we use this clicker training in the zoo field for. And I worked in the zoo field for many years before I started working with dogs and cats. I worked with primates. These are some chimpanzees that I work with at a chimpanzee retirement facility. And these guys are clicker trained to present body parts for an injection or for someone to listen to their heart. This little guy even was trained to pee in this pipe on cue because he was diabetic. And they had to check his sugar levels all the time. And this orangutan, also diabetic, was clicker trained to put up his arm and receive his insulin shot every day. And so these are the kinds of things that we use clicker training in the zoo field for. He gets his Kool-Aid reinforcer. Well, then clicker training moved to the dog training world, probably late 70s, early 80s, by a woman named Karen Pryor, who was a marine mammal trainer. And she thought, why do I go to work and use this really cool technique with my dolphins, and I go home and put a choke chain on my dog? And so she had this epiphany, and she decided to try clicker training with her dog. And so that's when clicker training moved to the dog world. And you can use clicker training to teach your dog all of the basic commands, the sit, the down, the stay, the come. It's very effective. And again, I'm just going to, this is a short talk, but so there's not a ton of detail about it. But just so you know, the clicker is just a tool to train the behavior. Once the dog knows the behavior, it's on cue, and they do it when you ask them, you don't need the clicker anymore. You can pop it out when you want to train a new behavior. But it's not something you have to carry around for the rest of your life. It's just a tool that helps you train the behaviors you want your dog to learn, right? So with clicker training, when the dog sits, we click the clicker when the butt hits the floor, then we toss the treat. Good boy. With down, we click the clicker when the dog lies down, and then we give the treat. Stay. So with stay, which is a duration behavior, we click the clicker when the dog has stayed the amount of time we want them to. So the dog is waiting to hear the click that says that's what you're getting reinforced for. And we can also train some really fun tricks with clicker training. In fact, that's one of the funnest things to do with clicker training, teaching the dog, high five or to wave or to bow or to balance a hot dog on their nose and then throw it up and catch it. All these tricks can be taught with clicker training. So you can teach your dog to spin. Okay, so the idea with spin, you just take a little food lure and you kind of go like this. And as he goes around, you say spin and you click and give him a treat. And pretty soon you can just do that and he spins. So you can teach lots of really fun tricks with your clicker. Bang. So you notice that my dog Kai, when he dies, he's wagging his tail. So, that trick is kind of cute, but he's always so excited to do it that his tail is wagging. But it's, these are the fun tricks you can teach. You might even be able to teach something like this, which is always fun, where the dog can weave through your legs. Of course, be careful if your dog is too big, because then, they might trip you while they're doing this. But that's a really fun trick to teach.
Cutter. Beer. Good boy. Thank you.
So for you beer drinkers in the crowd, or whatever you want out of that fridge, you can train your dog to get you that item. And clicker training is a great way to do that fun trick as well. And clicker training is not, restricted to zoo animals and marine mammals and dogs. You can actually clicker train your cat as well. Cats can actually be trained to do anything a dog can do. People just don't bother training cats. One thing about cat training is might take a little bit longer because they're usually real picky about their food. And, after 3 or 4 treats, they're done, where a dog could, train for 50 treats because they're such chow hounds. But you can absolutely train your cat to sit, to lie down, to stay. You can teach them to touch a target. That's the right hand picture. Target training is what I showed you in the zoo field we use all the time. It's just a fun thing to teach the animals. But you can also teach your cat to do fun tricks. And again, cats can be trained to do just about anything a dog can do. A high five, a sit pretty, a ring the bell, a jump through a hoop. You can clicker train your cat to do all these fun things. And cats are very smart animals. They love to learn. They love to do this stuff. So please, I encourage you to think about clicker training, not just your dog, but also your cat. You can even train your cat to do agility, which I know you've seen dogs do agility. So what you do is you clicker train the cat to do each piece of equipment, and then you kind of put 2 together and they do the 2, and then you add a third, and pretty soon you have a cat who does a whole agility course. And so all done through clicker training. And there's some resources for you to learn more about clicker training. Karen Pryor, the person I told you who brought clicker training to the dog world, has her own clicker training website, clickertraining.com. And she has lots of different books. Her Clicker Training for Cats is a great book to get you started with clicker training your cat. But you can also clicker train your bunny if you have a pet bunny at home. There's a book on clicker training your rabbit. And bunnies like to learn and do things just as much as cats and dogs do. Here's some clicker training for bunnies, teaching them to touch targets and go through a hoop and jump over a jump. So you can train bunnies to do lots of different fun things. You can even train a bunny to do agility. And so everybody thinks agility is just for dogs, but really any animal can do this if you're just patient enough to teach them how to do it. And so I encourage you, if you have other pets besides dogs and cats, to get that clicker out and start working with them as well. If you have horses, there's clicker training for horses. Again, really, really fun. Horses love to learn as well. All animals like to learn, and they certainly like to earn reward. And so this horse has been clicker trained to do a spin. Okay, so that's really fun. And if you have pet birds, you can also clicker train your bird. And Karen Pryor has a nice book for clicker training birds as well. And so this little guy has learned to do some fun things. So he's touching a target and getting his reward.
Yes, yes, good job.
He's going up on his platform.
Good job.
And so you can see that you can really use clicker training for just about any animal. You can even clicker train your goat. Now, I had pet goats for years. I never got this far with them, but I did use clicker training with my goats. This is not a video of my goat, but this goat learned how to run an agility course just like a dog. Goats are very much like dogs, which is why I loved having pet goats. And this guy has been clicker trained to do this fun agility course as well. So you can see that it doesn't really matter what animal we're talking about. They can learn anything you want to teach them with clicker training. Look at this. I know many dogs who couldn't even do the weave poles, but here we have a goat who loves the weave poles. And so hopefully this video is running well for you guys so you can see how fun it is. Oh, he missed his last jump, but you can see how fun this is for the goat as well as the goat's goat mom. And look, a goat can even learn how to go through the tunnel. Of course, goats love this sort of thing. So that is what you can do with a clicker with any pet that you might have. So I want you to go get yourself a clicker, do some research online, maybe read something about clicker training online, or buy yourself a book, you know, that relates to the pet that you have that you want to start training with the clicker. And you're going to have some fun, and so is your pet. It's also a great form of enrichment because it's mental stimulation because they're learning. It's obviously physical stimulation because they're moving. And it's, of course, social stimulation because you're working as a team as you teach your pet to do these things. And so I do hope this introduction to clicker training has helped you become enthusiastic about trying it with your own pets.